those meetings are usually pretty. Okay, there that goes. So usually they're pretty short. We're just giving quick updates because we know we're still kind of working on things or might be doing research. So we don't have a lot to talk about or share, but we can just kind of go around and say, the format we use for tele-IRC is kind of what you've done, what you're currently doing, and any blockers or concerns you have about the rest of the sprint. And then after that, once we all kind of do our quick stand-up, we can just have an open floor, talk about anything else that's on our minds or anything else that we want to cover, or maybe do pull request review too, since we have a couple that are open. But to start, I can just kind of give you an idea of what we do for tele-IRC for these updates. So for me, my done task this week was just the pull request with the docs toolchain. So I added a Python Sphinx documentation toolchain to the project. And right now it's pretty bare bones. It's mostly just skeleton for putting stuff in. But the doing for me this coming week is going to be actually writing really adapting the contributing guidelines that Nasir and I think Akash you also wrote. So going to be working on getting that out of our README and into the doc site and maybe doing a little bit of reorganization, that kind of stuff. That's what I'm looking at this week. For me, I don't really have, for what I'm working on, I don't really have any immediate blockers or concerns, but I would be interested to see the Flask 1.1 pull request get merged first, just so when I go back and go through the documentation, I can make sure I'm documenting it for the latest version of Flask. So that's all from me. I guess I don't know if I have a list. I don't know if the order of the view in the video in Jitsi is the same for everyone else. So I can just go. Why don't we do Nasir, Ramya, and Akash, and we'll go in that order. So over to you, Nasir.
Thanks, Justin. So I was actually working on the cache thing, and basically it was pretty simple, and I actually figured that out. And I was like sick for the past 3 to 4 days, had fever and stuff, so I wasn't able to create the PR or document it somewhere. So actually, the thing is, for the Mote cache, but Fedora, when it was created, we were actually using memcached, as we had that in Fedora so as that service was retired, so what the developer had worked on was to use a file-based storage and a JSON file where the cache was stored. So the thing was, in the default config file, it was trying to access a cache.json file in var/httpd/mode, and that is actually not a permitted file for a program to access. So it was having some access issues, and that was causing Flask to fail and the debugger to cause some issues, to cache some issues actually. So uh, what to fix that, you could just change the location of the cache.json file from var.httpd to just // in cache.json in the current directory, and that will fix that. Just gonna have a second. Okay.
Sorry, I just
So
put a format and reminder in the chat. Sorry, go ahead.
great. So okay, so I actually was working on that, and I wasn't able to document it and create the PR. So I'll work on that hopefully tomorrow. Uh, and For me, there aren't any blockers, but there's something that I would like to discuss, and we were working on, and that was to thinking about removing memcached at all. And I am actually not a +1 to that change. Actually, I would be on the zero side of things because memcached provides a faster cache than using a file system one. Plus, it would be it's a little hassle to set up on uh, Windows, as we saw in Hirati's case, because like that's not officially ported on Windows, so they can, so for that we can use file based cache. But like, are we planning to remove memcached? Because if it's there, there isn't any problem. I think it's just the library is pretty maintained, or the memcached SDK is also maintained. But if we are going to deploy it in the current Fedora infrastructure, we won't be using it. But if we are provisioning our new AWS instance or stuff, then we can use it there. So I would need the input that do we think that removing memcached would be a great idea, or like when you could just tweak it off in the config.python file?
I think it'll be a good open floor discussion. Let's go ahead and do for the stand-ups. We'll just go ahead and let everyone go around and give a chance to give an update, and then once we have like the full picture, then we can dive into like the deep technical discussion. But that is a good one too. Maybe I had a misunderstanding of memcached. So, anything else on your side before we pass to Ramya?
No, thank you.
Cool, and hope you feel better soon. Sorry to hear that you were sick. That's never any fun. So hope you feel better this week.
Thanks.
Yeah, feel better, Nasir. Okay, so what I did, I started with basics of HTML and CSS to understand what that all is, and then I try to see like play around with the inspect element. I think it worked, so I created a pull request. So that's all I did this week. So basics of HTML and CSS, and then the PR. I have a couple of things in my mind to explore for this week. I'm just thinking to learn about Docker a little more, all that containerization and all that stuff, like just to know the basics and stuff. So moving forward, I'll have a better understanding. I thought of doing that, but if there is anything else that I can do for a better flow, I am open to that as well. And for now, I don't have any blockers. So, yeah.
Super. Thanks.
Okay.
And
Got
over
it.
to
Okay.
you, Akash.
Yeah, so the first thing that I started with was installing Docker on my PC. That's the first thing. Then I immediately uninstalled it from my PC because I had this Raspberry Pi, a couple of Raspberry Pi devices. So I thought that why not have these devices dedicatedly for this purpose. So the first thing I did was pull a couple of images. The first was for Fedora and the second was for Ubuntu, because we have Bionic as the image that we are using as Travis. So I thought on exploring that, and then I did stuff, fetched images, made containers, then committed them just to get the feel of it, because Docker was something which was kind of new to me. And then I did all the mischievous stuff, like I made one container talk with another container. I mapped the ports with each other and made sure that multiple concurrent ports were acting. Then I ran multiple containers on a detached mode to see how strong the limit goes for a device which is as weak as Raspberry Pi 4. So all in all, I spent this entire week on learning the most I can with Docker. Then I moved on to Podman because I had this application which kind of required installation of a container engine on a client's PC, while making sure that they are not very intimidated by the processes that we kind of use to, adding the users to the group of the Docker just to have the access to all the stuff. So I also explored Podman a bit, but Docker was something I explored the most this week. Something that I'm working on still is still exploring Docker. I'm writing images and I'm converting them to tar.exe files. I also commented on a ticket that which image should be the one I should choose to be the base, to which Nasir replied to have the Python 3. So I pulled Python 3 and found that it was a whopping 712 MB of downloads. So I believe that might be something that we would want to discuss about. So talking about blockers per se, I don't have any, but there are discussions to be made, like the first thing being which image to use as the base. The first thing, the second thing being do we include the memcached D in the container, or do we have it outside it? Then that can be a thing. And the third thing being the documentation part, not really something which was assigned to me, but I still have doubts about having the requirements of that added in the common area for the project, as well as the documentation, or having it entirely in a separate way, because it's cleaner that way, although a bit inconvenient it can be. So well, that's about it from my side.
Super. Thanks. So I think the list of oops, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I just remembered that I also have the contributing MD documentation along with you, Justin. So if there is anything that I can do for that, yeah, I have that in my mind as well.
Super. And any notes that you had while you were going through that process? For the most part, it should still be the same with the newer version of Flask, maybe small changes, but definitely any ways that we can think about how to organize it or make it more clear, that'll be definitely helpful. That's once there's a first draft. So I think the items for discussion for today, based on what everyone brought up, is I think we should probably talk about what's going on with memcached and how we're going to handle that. Maybe very quickly, the Flask 1.1 pull request. I don't think there's a lot to talk about there, but just maybe a review of the pull request. Docker and containers and Podman, maybe just taking a minute to think about how are we approaching this, having a discussion on that. And then the last piece will be, I thought about that too. I didn't mention that in my update, was with the docs pull request. It's not, the dependency management is not very clear at all. So that'll be a good thing to talk about. And I think that was Hira that just joined us. Hey.
Hi. Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody.
Hey, welcome.
Hey, Hira.
So welcome. I know we've seen each other around in some of the other Fedora chats. So I don't know if you know everyone that's here in the call or if you've met them before, but we were just doing quick overviews of what we were working on this past week and what we were going to work on this next week. Maybe before we jump into the open floor discussion, we can just do some really quick intros, just so since it's your first time joining us, we can get to know each other a little bit more. Do you want to start and just do a quick introduction?
Yes, I'd like that. I'd like you to introduce yourself first.
Sure. So we can just go around with the room really quick.
Sure.
So my name is Justin. I'm a member of the Fedora Diversity and Inclusion team and do a couple of other things. Also a member of the Fedora Council, and I'm working with these fine, excellent group of folks here to work on modernizing the Meetbot Mote project to try to make it a little more interesting and relevant, because it's a project that gets seen a lot in Fedora. So it's a chance to get very visible, where this work is very visible. And I think it's it'd be nice to see it re-enter the new decade since it was first written. So that's a little bit from me. I'll pass to Akash.
Hi, I'm Akashdeep. I am a student in my day life, and I've been a part of Fedora since like 6 months from now. I started with the documentation, and then I moved on to writing a tool which kind of automates installation of NVIDIA drivers for Fedora. And then I'm working with these guys to make sure that Mote is modernized. It becomes the way we would want to be in 2020, like Justin said. How about you, Nasir? How about you go next?
Basically, Hira knows me from before as well. And just for the sake of introduction, let me give that. I'm Nasir Hussain. I work on Fedora Diversity and Inclusion team, along with working on the Fedora Mode developers to work on modernizing it to Python 3 and a lot of stuff as well. So, Ramya, would you like to go next?
Yes. So hi, I'm Ramya. I also started with the A&I team in Fedora. I think it's just been about 2 months since I joined Fedora community. And now I'm working on Mote. I am also exploring a couple of other things that I can work on. But yeah, and I'm from a non-technical background, so a lot to learn, a lot to experience and all that stuff. So yeah, it's great here. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to meet all of you. It's kind of awkward. Hira Tariq, and I am a student in software engineering, and I'm doing my bachelor's, and it's like my last semester, but I'm not a great coder actually, but I've been interested and inclined towards data sciences and AI since like the past months. So I thought, why not that kid? He said that, meet people who are working on Mote and who who are working on Python as well. And other than that, I'm really passionate about building communities as well. So I work with GDG, if you know about it.
A little bit.
Google Developers Group.
Your audio is a little choppy.
And I co-manage that community. And other than that,
I think there's some issue with your voice. Is that with me? Just with me?
Working as a growth hacker.
There's a little bit of the audio is a little choppy, but I can make it out. I can make out most of that.
Same here.
I don't know if it'll. I don't know if you can still hear us okay, or if it's broken up.
Yes, I hear you. I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me? Well,
it comes through in little patches. Now we can hear you.
Yeah, now it's much clearer.
Yeah, it's clear for me.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yes, much better.
Okay, do I have to repeat? Do I have to?
Oh no.
Yeah.
The fun of intercontinental video calls. There's always audio video challenges and low bandwidth context. So what I guess we can do is, okay. Hey, Hira. Can you hear us okay?
Hey, can you hear me now? Sorry
Yes.
for the trouble. Okay.
No problem.
So do I have to repeat the introduction?
We got most of what you said. It was just towards the end, it started to get really choppy.
Okay, great.
So maybe then just since we have about half an hour left for the meeting schedule today. So this was recorded, so you can also go back and see the beginning part where we were talking about updates later. But what we're going to talk about, the agenda for the rest of the call, and I think it might be a little tough to jump into the project right now, but we're working on contributing guidelines. Or Rami and I are working on getting that improved. So it should be a little easier, I think, next week to jump in and start looking at things to work on. But for now, we'll just do a quick update. You can listen in on the discussion, and if you have any questions, you're welcome to bring them up or mention them as we're going through the topics. So the agenda, just to do a quick refresh, was memcached, Flask update, container plan, what are we doing with containers, and then the docs dependencies. So Nasir, since you brought up the memcached issue, do you want to go ahead and just give us an overview on it really quick and what the open question might be? Over to you.
Sure. So memcached is actually a cache storage where it stores some cache in your memory, and you can easily access that. It was a part of Fedora infrastructure some long time ago, but after some time it wasn't. So the Mote app was actually shifted towards using a file-based storage, which is a little slow than accessing it in memory. So what the Mote developers did, they added an option in the config file to either turn off the memcached and you provide a path to a file in which all the cache would be stored and retrieved from. So do we need to keep the current setting the way it is happening? So and it is actually something that we would be discussing while we would be deploying it as well, because if we are deploying it on some other instance other than the Fedora infrastructure, that's going to cause us another issue, because the meetbot bot on IRC, which pushes the meetings to a server or some file location, the Mote app actually reads it from there. So whenever we try to access on our local Mote application, whenever I had a proposal as well, so I have one more topic for OpenFlow. I just recalled that. So do we need to keep the current setting, because that's gonna be a, or we would like to remove memcached completely? The SDK is really well, so I am a zero from my. It's a zero from my side. Justin, your.
Yeah, so I guess my first question is what I'm not clear about. I have opinion or I have thoughts about the deployment piece, but what I'm wanting to understand is what exactly is memcached doing for Mote? Because my understanding was it was kind of like a file store memory cache, but just storing files in a cache. But I haven't worked with it before extensively. I guess I'm still not clear on what exactly its benefit is to the app, and that will probably change what my thought would be.
So basically, what Justin does is whenever we fetch stuff from the Meetbot API, right, where we have all the chats stored. So the thing is, what we do is we have this huge chunk of data just because if the meeting is last, and it's a huge chunk that we're fetching it from there. Times are there are certain parts of it which stays common. So there's this module kind of handles it for us. Then it kind of restores that same part back whenever we need it, so that the subsequent loadings of IRC chats are relatively faster. And the difference is huge. I've seen it happening. I've read some blogs. I didn't see it applying to a specific project per se, but the difference is huge. But the reason why I kind of am not very towards having memcached over here, because we are kind of fighting with the module instead of having it work for us in this scenario. In other cases, I think it's required. It's very, very critical. But for our application, the chats would not be as big or as uh, what we can say varied that we would require this to be in place to repeat stuff over and over again and bring it back. Sorry for that. Right. So we would not need to repeat these stuffs because it won't be as big as compared to the applications I've seen in the blog posts that I've visited too. So at this point of time, even Nasir has been working a bit more about how he can make use of memcached and not fight with it and deal with the errors. So if it helps, if it really helps, if it really makes that much of a difference, then we would find it worth our time to fight with it and get that difference, get that solution for it. But if it's not a very big difference, then I think we should probably let it go. So, well, it's +1 for my side to let it go and -1 to retaining it. So, whichever is the one that we're counting. What do you think, Justin? What do you think, Ramya?
Yeah, at this point, I feel it's the same. Like if we don't need memcache for like if we are having lightweight meetings and all that, and if it's easy to fetch all of them from a database like JSON file, for now, I think it's okay if we don't have memcached. But again, I do not have much experience with this, so I don't know. It's neutral for me. Whatever you guys think is the best for now. And I also think we should keep in mind for the future thing as well. Like, we can't keep going and forward. Like, maybe memcached is good, so maybe let's get it back, or maybe let's try with the other one. So I mean, I think we should keep in mind the future things as well. Like, at one point, if things become heavy, they are not lightweight anymore, and if we need memcached, how hard it is for it to go back from, if we go with the JSON file, like how hard it is to go back, and like, maybe we should think about that as well, I guess.
First of all, Justin, about your question that why are we using memcached, I am not sure on that as well. And why are we using, like, as Akashdeep said, uh, I'm not pretty sure like how it integrates with the whole Moat ecosystem. I don't know about that because I just checked the cache file, changed the location, and it worked. So I was like happy that it worked, but I didn't had enough time to explore that and to see what's inside that. So it is gonna take some time for us to understand what's all this cache thingy. But I think Ramya actually highlighted a really important point, and that is to see, like, if we are going for the file one, how easier would it be for us to move to memcached? Because, like, in future, if we would like to improve the cache situation, then migrating from memcached to file-based system would be simpler because you wouldn't be, as Akashdeep previously mentioned, you wouldn't have to integrate or do some stuff with the module. You are just gonna move the location of the cache to a file and open some file handlers and stuff. But with memcached, the SDK is really really simple, so you don't have to like fight with it a lot as you do with other Python modules. But it's well, so if it's there, and for the developer setup, we could like say, ask the developers or document it somewhere that which cache would they like to use. If they would like to use the file one, we can like create a script to modify the config file using sed to move to the file cache, or if they like to do the memcached one, we could do that as well. And like there's just a true to false statement in the config file. So I think that's what I think about the cache situation.
Got it. So I think for me, the reason why I'm curious about this is because if we keep this in scope, keeping memcached, so in terms of our project mission, last week we talked about what are the high level goals and objectives that we want to accomplish for the project. So you can think of that as kind of our scope. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to make sure that we follow as we go with development? The reason why I'm concerned about memcached is because if we do keep it in the project, it just adds another component that we'll have to look at for deployment to infrastructure. And there's probably two ways of doing that. It would be one, we take the time to run and host it ourselves on our own infrastructure. And now we're also responsible for maintaining a memcached environment, which might not be the most desirable thing for us. The alternative is using something like what AWS offers, their solution for a hosted memcached environment. But again, that would be one that, while it might not add complexity or might not expand the scope in the way that we have to host it ourselves, it does expand the scope in the sense that we still have to work with that infrastructure, and we'll have to work with Fedora infrastructure team specifically on billing and making sure that we have to be responsible with that resource. Whereas if we self-hosted, well, if it's not totally efficient, it's not as big of a deal because it's not like we're being billed by how efficient or how much resources we're using. So that's what my perspective is on this, is it just adds a different, or it adds another infrastructure component to the whole project. So where I'm leaning right now is because I don't know what the performance difference of Mote in production with memcached or without is going to be. We don't have test data or any sample data to look at for that. Well, maybe. Akash, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, Justin. The thing is, the responsiveness, the addition to responsiveness is kind of, it's felt at the client's end. So when we are using memcached, it kind of makes it a lot more efficient for the loading up at the client's end whenever it happens. So if somebody is moving from one IRC chat to some other IRC chat and finds that there are some parts which can be replicated, which can be moved on, put it forth in front of the client, that kind of loads up much faster as it comes to the client. But in terms of the server side, I don't think there's much difference in the case of computation, but it becomes a lot more usable, a lot more interactive at the client's end. That's the first thing to note. But then again, if we have chats which are that big, then only it would come handy. But for chats with, let's say, 5,000 messages or more, we were not much likely to be needing memcached. But when it goes much more higher, like 7,500 lines of messages down and forth, then maybe down the line we would be needing memcached. But then again, do we have people who would be moving from one chat to another chat, like they have seen this one chat and now they are like looking for references of this chat to other chat? But if there's not such a use case, that if they're looking at this one chat only and then leaving the website for a considerable amount of time, then I don't think memcached would be that useful. It's kind of adding an overhead in that case, because if we have these kind of use cases that we have people who are looking into multiple chats at one point of time, then loading up is fast at that point of time. But if we don't have that, and that is kind of the case with IRC, because we see the records for one chat, okay, this and this happened, I'll make notes, this is what I'm supposed to do, and then I'll be gone. So at that kind of cases, it's not handy, and that is at most of the times. So as much as it is useful, but we don't have that use case to make it useful.
Got it. So here's what I'm going to propose, just so make sure we have time to talk about the other topics in this meeting. I'm going to open a new issue on GitHub to collect our thoughts on the memcached, whatever we do with memcached in the project. I think it's going to take some more research, is what is going to be the need for moving this forward. My hypothesis is that we would go without it maybe for now, because we want to focus on modernizing the application in other more exciting ways than updating the dependencies. But that's not necessarily, that might not be the case. So I'm going to open a new issue for that on GitHub. And what I was going to ask is, Nasir and Akash, would you want to take that on for the next sprint, starting next week, or do you want to add that to the current sprint load for this week? I figured you two could tag team it, since you've worked at it and looked at it more. And then you could come back to our dev meeting with a more concrete recommendation. Like, here's option 1, option 2. Which one are we going to do? So the question, I guess, is, do you want to take that on this sprint? Do you have that bandwidth, or do you want to add it to the next sprint? So there'll be a 2-week period starting next week.
I am +1 for the next sprint. What do you think, Akash?
Super. That's what I would have done. Cool. So I'll go ahead and I have that open in a GitHub tab. I'll do the issue follow up after the meeting, and so we'll have a place to start collecting thoughts on that. So we'll revisit that next week, coming for the next sprint. So don't work too hard on trying to figure out memcached stuff this week if you don't have to. So I think maybe before we move on, any last thoughts on memcached before we talk about Flask 1.1? Going once, going twice, sold. All right. So Flask 1.1, that one I just think was a quick update just because, well, we all already approved the pull request. There's just a merge conflict there. I just don't know, is there any where's the pull request I'm looking for here?
It's just a conflict.
Is there anything blocking this?
No, it's already being approved. I think the only thing that needs to be added are hashes to the modules that we're trying to import over here in the log file, that is.
Yeah, that would be the last thing. So it just needs to be a
minor change. It's not really a big one.
Yep. That command will do the generation and you can just commit that file. So I guess, well, yeah, the dependency change looks fine to me. Just getting the lock file in, that'll impact our CI pipeline as well.
Sure. So
actually,
yeah,
go ahead.
So I'm just gonna run that command and hopefully create the commit there in the next minute.
Super. So maybe there's not a whole lot to really discuss there, but once you get that pull request up, just drop a message in the Mote chat and just let us know when the pull request is ready for review, and we'll get it merged. But I guess we don't have to talk about it because I think it's pretty straightforward. I guess I didn't look at the pull request or that closely. So we can go ahead and move from the Flask one to maybe before we do the container discussion, because I think that'll be a longer one. Maybe we can just do really quick on the docs dependencies pull request about how that's set up and working. I figured it'll be a little faster if we could just talk through it instead of going through the GitHub chat and just save us time. I'm pulling up the pull request real quick.
Sure thing.
So I think the last thing you said is you did notice that little hacky way of making that requirements txt file. So maybe to add some background to this is we have 3 different virtual environments that are all in play by different vendor or different vendors that we're using, like Read the Docs and Travis and the actual project development. So what I tried to do is to make the pip file with pipenv the resolute, like the single source of truth for dependencies. But the issue is, while I can do that with Travis, okay, even though I have to go and look at the CI job because something's not working right there either, and that's on me to look at. Readthedocs.org requires a requirements txt file for the project. And that's just for the docs dependencies, nothing else. So it's kind of annoying because if I want the site to build, I have to include that file, and it does, Read the Docs does not support pipenv. So that's a little bit of the background on why I did things the way I did. I tried not to generate a requirements txt file that would get in the way. I don't know. It all kind of feels like a little hacky to me, but these kinds of things are tough. Did you have a specific comment? Or I'm looking at the pull request now.
You know what, Justin, that requirements.txt, you marked it right. That was the thing which caused all that confusion. I mean, if I would have seen that the pipenv file is also there, then I would have picked it that first. But, you know, it's just a requirements.txt file which in the first place.
There were no docs
again,
about the docs.
That even though exactly, yeah, we need documentation about docs that, you know, this requirements.txt. Do not use it when you're trying to run the project. It's only for documentation. Stay away from it. It's just for readthedocs.org. While then again, the requirements .txt does not have the dependencies for the documentation. It's the pip.env which has it. So you'd want to take a look at it, Justin. If I think I'm right, just let me take a look again. Yeah, so Sphinx and all that are absent over there, and it's there on pip.env. So you'd want to add it over there.
Yeah, the requirements txt is pulling in. It would be better to just install the docs dependencies and not the whole Flask stack. That would be true.
Right.
I have
Yeah,
okay.
Nasir, go ahead.
The random idea that I had, you guys have already discussed it here, so we are good.
Right.
Cool. So I'll follow up and I'll figure out another workaround for the doc stuff. But once that's done and once the CI pipeline is passing again, I think we can probably merge that one through. And then there will coming soon right after that, the docs about the docs and the contributing guidelines. Those will be coming up next. So that'll hopefully become a little more clear too. But I'll follow up on that on my side. I'll make a note I'll just save this tab for later. So I'll follow up on that and I'll drop a ping to you in IRC once it's ready for final review. And awesomeness here. We'll get that pull request merged here shortly. So the only other topic left is containers. And I see we do have issue 142 open, and we briefly talked about this last week, but I think that was thinking more about local development with a container than it really was production. And then there's also the issue about the base image we wanted to use. Do either of you want to give a quick context to the container discussion, or do you have a clear question you want to ask to the group before we jump in?
Yeah, Justin. So I started off with the Bionic image, because that's what was used in in the Travis
For CI.
for the CI, and I found that it was really small in size, so it was something that we could use. But then again, I moved on to Python because that's what Nasir had suggested me, and then I found that it was as big as 731 MB. And I talked with Vipul, and he was like, the bigger the size, the inefficient that would be. So I'm like, nope, that is certainly not something that we want to go for in terms of local development, because somebody would just run out of their daily just because they're pulling this container image. Rather, we can have a distribution base which can be even Fedora, because Fedora is as efficient as 72 MB, 204 when it becomes 72 MB is cool. That's what I think. And Focal Fossa
You
becomes
broke up
72.
there for just a sec.
Okay, am I audible right now? Okay,
Yes.
cool. So whenever you download Focal Fossa, or let's just say you download Bionic, so it's just 36 MB of download. And when you download it and it becomes expanded, it becomes 72 MB. But when you download Fedora, it's just 72 MB. And when it expands upon, then it becomes 204. Something that I'd call very, very efficient as compared to the images that we have for Python, which is as big as 731 MB of download. God knows how much it would become on expanding. So we would want to use a base image of Fedora or Bionic or Focal, and then install Python on it, a bare bones Python with just the dependencies that we would want to use, and then we'll have it as the container image for our use. What do you guys think?
So I just have one thing to add here. So as Akash Deep mentioned about Bionic, Fedora, and Focal, I was thinking, how about using Alpine? Actually, that's like way, way, way more simpler, efficient, and smaller. And you can like APK install Python, and we can overlay our dependencies in the root file system there. What do you think about that?
Plus one from my side. Definitely, Alpine is something we would want to work on. But as the as the developers grow in our more developers group, So we would want to, keep the scope that people would be actually aware about how Alpine works, how the package management Alpine works. So if that is sorted out, if we can write a small documentation about how to make use of the container, then maybe, yeah, Alpine is definitely the best choice over here.
Yeah, I'll concur with that too. From my experience in production engineering with people who are building pretty complex web applications, I usually see people use the Alpine Linux images. Maybe just for context for the folks who are less container savvy. So the issue that we're really thinking about here is, or with the choosing a base image, is about container size, because choosing an image that's going to be a smaller size will have a smaller footprint for when you're doing all this network. You're pulling your container image. If you have a huge image, it's just going to take longer to build and deploy your application. So the leaner your container, your Docker container image is, the easier it is or it's just easier to transfer it, and it will make it a little more responsive. So Alpine Linux is a very specific kind of Linux that, as far as I know, is really made for that whole container use case. It's like a bare bones Linux distribution. It's, to my knowledge, I don't know if it's even based on Debian or RPM. I think it's all its own thing.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So really, I think that would be probably the most ideal option to me. Would be choosing an Alpine Linux based image. That would be because I don't know if we'll set that up for local development or if we'll stick with the Dockerfile, Docker Compose way of doing it locally. I guess the question is how much. Well, I don't know. I guess it's like, how much do we want? I guess that doesn't have to change local development. If we're still using it, we want to use a container for local development eventually. I would say that the best thing for now would probably be to use the Alpine Linux image, if that's not going to be too much cost of time, and we can try to build a base on that to make it really lean. I'm just trying to think if that would slow down, as I want to make sure, we're going to be writing the contributing docs this week. And this is something that we have in scope for this sprint. Do you think this is something that an Alpine Linux, like just a version 1, it doesn't have to be perfect, but just a working Alpine Linux Docker file for Mote, do you think that's doable this week? I don't know who was assigned to this. So that would be, I guess, Akash. Do you think that would be a doable task?
Yeah, Justin, it would be a doable task. But do I proceed with Alpine? Do we have the consensus that Alpine is to be used for this one? If that is the case, then yeah.
It's a +1 from my side.
+1 from my side too.
And ultimately, it's one of those things that's not so different, or it's not incredibly difficult to change later. If we be like, oh my gosh, Alpine was not the right decision, we have to do Fedora or something else. Like, it won't be the end of the world if we have to change later. But I think it's good to try it out. Let's use that as a start and go from there. So we'll keep that on board for this sprint, and I'll do a follow-up comment in the issue about using an Alpine base. Okay, so that was all, unless there's anything else someone wants to add there. That was all 4 of the, go ahead, Nasir.
I have just one thing to add and discuss. I was thinking to propose it in a GitHub issue, and I didn't. So let's just discuss it here in really quick. It's just 1 minute. So what we want to do is that whenever we currently set up the mode for development, whenever we try to open a meeting or search for one, it actually results in an error. It's a 500 error which says that the meeting file is not in the background. For testing, what we do is that we create some sample files, empty files for the meetings, and that's how our testing test suite works. So what we can do is, for the development setup, we can create some random meetings. So whenever someone wants to test if their CSS, like in Ramia's case, the CSS is working fine, so that would be way more efficient for the developer to work on, rather than getting 500 errors when trying to search or opening some meetings. What do you think about that? I can create an issue for that, and we can like think about the constraints there, like what should be the names of the meetings, or do we want to create another branch for development and keep that default and create one master that we can use in for deployments for, and what would be our constraints, like by what names we want to create the meetings, like should it be some random name? We can't go for all random, but what it should be. So I'm going to create an issue for that, and we can continue it there because we are actually running out of time now. Right?
Yeah, I think it'll be good to push that forward in an issue discussion. And yeah, that was one of the things I did hit when I was running it locally was, there's not any meetings to look at locally. So I think that is really important for local development. And I think, I assume that we could just use, because we have real data and it's public and it's usable, we could actually just go get real Fedora meeting logs and put those in.
How many?
But yeah, well, that would be, I think we could just start with something like 10, 10 just to get like an idea of maybe different kinds of meetings, or, it doesn't have to be too crazy. Or it doesn't have to be so many at first. Eventually, once we get a staging environment set up, hopefully we could actually use real logs, like from the whole, all of them. We'll get there, and yeah, no, decades about, I think, if not more. Wow. So let's push that forward in an issue discussion. We'll definitely want to push that up. Probably next sprint, we'll really want to make sure we do that, just because it really is needed for local development. But we'll integrate it into those contributing docs once those are written. We'll make sure that gets covered, because I think that's really going to be important to help us actually get things done. See your changes locally. So +1 to me. If you open an issue for it, we'll add it to the next sprint.
Awesome. Thanks.
Cool. All right. Well, we have about 5 minutes left. Anyone have anything else they want to add or bring up before we wrap up for today?
Yeah, Justin, just one thing. It might be nitpicking, but anyway, I'll say it. So now that we're having the container based on Alpine, and for people who may not be as comfortable with Alpine, so we might want to have a documentation section in the documentation part of it, telling them about how they can use Alpine, how to interact with it, just the basic that they would need.
I'd just like to add one thing there. It's actually a good thing to document it, and I would be a +1 to that. But I don't think people would like to actually like get into the Alpine shell and do some stuff there, because like what Docker and what we are trying to do is to just provide some synthetic sugar where you
Yeah.
can create reproducible deployment or development environments. I think that's the reason we are trying to use Docker, or like if there are some use cases where we would like to get into the shell, that's where document would be really essential, and I think it is essential for now as well.
Yeah,
The
because developers
contradiction,
would actually need to get into the Alpine shell. So yeah,
that's cool. Yeah, we need that.
we need that. We need to get into Alpine. So
No,
that's way.
you can write the Docker file, and that will actually up the project in itself as well. You wouldn't have to get into the shell.
Okay. All right. So Dockerfile is something that I'm yet to explore. So I think that I just overlooked it because I don't know about it yet. So yeah, Dockerfile is something I'd explore. But then again, for someone, if they are to get into Alpine and then make changes to the container image itself, we might want to have a documentation section, however small it is, precise, concise, small, and cute. We want to have it for that thing.
I think that would definitely be in the scope for the contributing guidelines. And I think the draft 1.0 of the contributing guidelines won't have the container. We'll probably be more pip-env oriented.
Yeah.
Once we have a container image and we have it, we're pretty comfortable with how it works, we'll update the docs, make sure that gets reflected there. Oh, and I did just, I hope that link isn't, I've had that bookmarked for a while. I hope it isn't gone. That was a great blog post. I put a link in the chat. It looks like it works for me. I have to accept an invalid. Looks like the SSL certificate expired.
skip that.
Um,
So on.
but if you can open that link I shared in the chat, it's just that the certificate expired. It's not that it's, at least I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Yeah. No, it's a self-signed. No. Oh, it expired 10 days ago. That's why. So, but that's a great blog post that I've referenced for a long time, and I've had previous coworkers share with me. It's a really helpful overview of how you can write really lean, efficient Docker files because of how all the layering, it's all about the layers, you know. So I think that might be a good reference for you. But, you know, I think that'll definitely be something as far as docs go and making sure we cover it. It definitely will be a part, but probably won't be it for this week's, you know, the version 1, but we'll definitely build on it, improve it. And once we have the container ready, we'll add the docs then.
Sure thing.
Well, cool. I know it's almost 9:30 or 9 for folks over there in the evening, so we can go ahead and wrap up here. I'll get the video recording uploaded to my personal YouTube, and I'll drop a link in the developer chat once it's ready. But until then, we will catch up next week. And if anything comes up, just drop a line in the dev chat. See you all soon.
All right. Great. Bye, all.
Bye.
Bye.
See you.
all.
Bye, everyone.
Good night. Good morning.
Bye. Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Good morning.